Welcome back to another episode of Fret Buzz the podcast. Hi, I'm Aaron Sefchick, and every week together with my co-host Joe McMurray, we focus on how we musicians and professionals approach our craft, giving insight to help us all become more informed and better musicians. This week we're going to dive into part 2 with Don Ross, all about fingerstyle guitar. As always, if you enjoy Fret Buzz the podcast, hop on over to iTunes and give us a review. And by all means, hop on over to YouTube and subscribe. We only need 2 more to hit 100, which would be awesome. In this episode, we get into songwriting, analog recording, touring, the good times and the bad times, originality and what role that plays within music. We get into a lot of cool stuff with Don. So by all means, let's jump into part 2 with Don Ross on Fret Buzz, the podcast.
I'd love to talk to you about your songwriting approaches and how those approaches have changed over the years. I know we've talked about your starting with the bass line ideas, and you were trying to have different tuning for Klimbim, but are there certain things that do you sit down and say, I want to write a song today, or do you get something in your head and then you decide that you want to sit down and put this to paper into the instrument? What comes first, and is it different every time? Is it melody first and then harmonizing that with chords?
Well, of course, there's a lot of different experiences over the years, but I would say, to sort of be nutshellish about it, what's happened most of the time in the past is that I'll get a musical idea that starts swimming around in my head. Very often I'm nowhere near a guitar at the time, because I kind of, probably a lot of musicians experience this, but I kind of almost always have music going on in my head. Like it's almost always there. I get a riff or a thing, or just a song I heard in the radio 5 years ago that I haven't been able to shake it out of my head, whatever it is. So there's almost always, I'm like that Peter Griffin and that Family Guy thing where he wants his own theme music. It's kind of like I have my own theme music going on. Oh, I'm riding on the bus. Anyway, it's a very funny scene. Anyway, what I find is that very often I get these ideas when I'm nowhere near the instrument. So I think, okay, make a strong mental note of that, put that in the memory bank, and try to remember it when you got a guitar in your hand next, kind of thing. And then very often I find that the idea I have kind of works, but kind of doesn't. And usually the kind of doesn't part is that the range of the melody or whatever is not really achievable in standard tuning or in another tuning that I use. So that's when I start altering my tuning very often to make something achievable on the instrument. And that's why now I use a crazy number of tunings. I have a tuning database on one page on my website, and it's hilarious. People are often saying, hey, I wrote my whole last album based on a bunch of tunings I saw on your website, and that's great. I think it's awesome. But so I have a lot of homemade tunings for that reason, to solve compositional problems. I also tend to think like a songwriter when I write. So when you think about song form, like a really well-written song, almost all the really memorable songs you've ever heard use a combination of verses, choruses, and maybe a bridge. Now, the classic pop song is that. It's those 3 elements, so you have a strong verse, and then you have a really catchy chorus, and then you go to some new place, maybe 2/3 of the way through the song. So the Beatles, for example, used to refer to that as the middle 8, because that's an old songwriting term, because usually bridges were about 8 bars long. So not always, but usually. So the Beatles always referred to it as the middle 8, even if it was 16 bars or 12 bars or 11 bars long or whatever it was. So that those elements, if you think like a songwriter, well, how does a song go? Usually goes verse number 1, verse number 2, chorus, verse number 3, chorus, bridge, new place to go for a little while. Comes back to the chorus, and maybe there's another verse, and then maybe a double chorus at the end. There's your song. So that was very liberating to me, to sort of study song form in school and then realize that I had been using it unconsciously. And then I thought, okay, well, that's great. That sort of confirms my idea that really all you need is 3 strong elements, 3 strong ideas in your piece to make it memorable. And so that's what I tell my students all the time who are interested in composition, that that kind of um, modular way of thinking when you're writing, uh, and repetition the right number of times, following a certain formula it's malleable, of course, but based on a sort of an ABC kind of uh, design, then you end up with really memorable pieces of music. The problem I found, like when I started out writing a lot of music, especially in the 80s, was that was kind of during the new age scare, and there's a lot of really, really unmemorable music being written for like solo piano, solo guitar. Some of it was great, but some of it was kind of like just a lot of notes, and it was just very often the pieces just kind of started and then just kept going and going and going. And what I realized what was missing was thematic development. And theme in music is really mostly about repetition. Music needs repetition in order for us to, unless you're doing something very experimental. Like John Cage didn't rely on repetition, and neither did Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. But Steve Reich certainly does, and Philip Glass certainly does. But repetition of that kind of form element, that's what makes it work like a song. So yeah, so that for me that's how it tends to work. And then in terms of where I'm going to go, in terms of brass tacks musically, very often it's based on a groove idea. It might be something that swings a little bit, so for example, especially since the 90s, I've been writing a lot of tunes with kind of a hip hop double time swing element, like a 16th note swing, that kind of rhythm. So if you think of Michael, 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 or
Hmm.
Afraid to Dance, or Dracula and Friends, and any of those really funky ones, they all use that rhythm, which of course I grew up with as well. Stevie Wonder used it all the time, and so and that to me made my music stick out a bit, because it wasn't just boom chicky boom chicky boom chicky boom chicky like a lot of fingerstyle guitar has tended to be.
Mm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
That's very helpful. Your songwriting approach is definitely something that we've had we've had some past guests say that, but you put it nicely into words there.
No, thanks.
Yeah. Is there a song that you've written where you were do you have a favorite song that you've written, or is there anything that you wrote where you were just like, as soon as you wrote it, you had this like bursting excitement because you knew you had written something that
Well, I
was
certainly went through.
especially good?
I went through this spasm of writing in the late '90s that, to this day, some of those tunes really stand out as among my favorite of my own tunes,
Mhm,
and certainly the tunes that I wrote on especially for this one album called Passion Session, which I
mhm.
re-released. Basically, I re-recorded the whole album as PS15 a few years ago, mostly because the record label that I recorded that album for went out of business, thanks to the internet. And so so a lot of people love those tunes, but they didn't really have any easy way to, certainly no way to get them on disc, so so at shows it was nice to have that album again and put it out on vinyl and the whole thing. But tunes like Klimbim are on that album, and Michael, 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 and
Blue Bear.
Blue Bear, So
I
Little
love that.
Time, No Goodbyes. There's, those are all tunes that are still really special to me, and I every time I play them, I go, wow, I'm really proud of this tune. So, and that's nice. And there's a danger, I suppose, that I or somebody else might say, oh, my best years are behind me, but no, that's just not true. I still write new tunes that I like just as much. But there was just this, I don't know what it was. It was something in the air that year, that just really made me want to write a lot of music. Plus, it was my first record for Narada, which was a U.S. label. Like before that, been only on Canadian labels with only Canadian distribution, and it was pre-internet. So even though I had more of an international thing going on, I didn't really have international releases. So it was a big deal for me that Passion Session was going to get released in virtually every market you could think of. It came out in Poland and Japan and Mexico and the States and Canada and everywhere. So it's kind of like, oh, awesome. Well, I'm going to just write all these killer tunes. And it's kind of fun. Every once in a while, you see things like Acoustic Guitar magazine or whatever will list, the top 16 records made between whatever, and then that album's usually there in their list of top whatever records, and I feel really happy about that body of work, ended up all on one record, and I kind of think, wow, yeah, it's like this little gem,
Absolutely. I love that one.
Thank you.
And I love the variations that your reimagining of those tunes in PS15 is, they're obviously the same tunes, but you can tell you've played them thousands of times and you've messed with the rhythms and added extra little flair and nuance.
Yeah, you bet. And a big element of what I do anyway is improvisatory. So I probably think more like a jazz writer than a lot of people would necessarily in this sort of world that I, whatever box I'm in. So since a lot of the tunes have elements of improvisation in them, that's how the tunes get morphed. And then very often, even the PS15 versions, the 15th anniversary album that I put out, even that very often was just what happened in front of the mics that one day. The tunes can take on a different life on a different day.
In your studio time, have things evolved a lot recently? Where do you record, and do you use the same Beneteau guitars to record? And then are there any things you remember from the recording sessions that might be helpful to those of us who are trying to record with our microphones at home?
Yeah, well, that's what I do. I've been doing that since. Well, I have the advantage of I did a music degree. Just to check this
Yeah,
for a second.
yeah. We never got your full backstory. Sorry.
Yeah, I did a music degree at York University in Toronto. I graduated back in the 80s, and so it's a bachelor's degree. I never went and got my master's or doctorate. I sort of got talked out of them by my former profs. They just said, Don, you should be working. Get out there and work. So I decided back then I wasn't going to be an academic, which I kind of regret now that I'm in my 50s. It would be kind of nice to say, well, I could just be a professor somewhere. But anyway, I've sort of done part-time professorships at universities over the years, which has been a blast because I love being in academia. I really enjoy it. I love being around all these eager young minds too. It's awesome. Anyway, so I did a music degree, and one of the courses I took was a 2-year course in electronic music. And at the time, of course, digital technology was still very nascent. So we had some digital effects. We had digital delay and we had digital reverb and that kind of thing. But we didn't really have any digital recording devices because nothing was really any good yet. I mean, digital was 8-bit at the time. It didn't sound good. So I learned how to engineer on tape, and I was using an 8-channel reel-to-reel tape recorder through a Soundcraft board and the whole thing. And I learned how to choose microphones, how to attenuate properly, how to EQ, how to saturate tape, how to compress, this kind of thing. And it really came in super handy because I eventually got signed to record deals. And my first deal was with a small independent label out of Toronto that had distribution through MCA, which is Universal now. And it was cool because we recorded at the label's own studio, and they had this wild reel-to-reel digital setup. So it was this setup that didn't last long. There were sort of two competing formats. Sony had a format and Mitsubishi had a format. And so this studio used the Mitsubishi, and what it was 1-inch tape, reel-to-reel, going 30 IPS, just like analog tape, except it was videotape. And on the 1-inch, you could fit 32 channels. So I was recording solo guitar music on a 32-channel machine, which was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, we set up a lot of mics. We ended up just using, not very many of them, just because we had all these channels. And then we mixed to a Mitsubishi 2-channel tape machine, and I used 1/4-inch videotape. So it looked just like a traditional tape recorder, except it was all digital. And of course, you could record, I guess at the time, it was like 16-bit 44K, so CD quality on tape. So it was kind of a wild thing that didn't last long. And then, so I could use my analog experience to understand how that technology worked. And then eventually I started making records on 24-inch analog tape again for a few records. And then finally, computers got so good and the internet happened and my record label went out of business. So then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to make my own records now. I'll get geared up. So at the time, I bought my brand new Macintosh G4 computer tower and a ProTools version, -5, whatever it was at the time,
Yep. Yep.
and got myself set up, and I started telling my friends, "Hey, I'll engineer your record for free, if you don't mind being my studio guinea pig." So I did, I think, 2 or 3 records for friends. First, I was using the free version of Pro Tools because they used to give away a version on a CD, and you could record onto your computer using the sound in on your Mac.
Yep.
You could record one channel at a time, but you could also mix in stereo. You could run outboard effects and stuff. And I did all that. I did soundtracks for TV shows and radio shows and stuff with the free version of Pro Tools. Then I bought myself the G4 and got a full version of Pro Tools. And then I got signed to Narada, and I did my first record for them in Germany, the Passion Session record. That was done on a hard drive recorder, not a computer, but basically a dedicated hard drive recorder in Germany. And then I did a record called Huron Street, which was recorded on again, this is just when computers were just not quite doing it yet. So there were these dedicated digital machines. This was called a Gen X, I think it was called, and you could record 24-bit and probably up to 96K or something, really high resolution onto a hard drive. And because at that time, everybody was panicking. Napster had happened, and Narada, my label, was saying, well, we have no idea what people are going to buy next week even. So what we're going to do is we're going to record things super high res and kind of hope something like DVD audio takes off eventually with the marketplace, or super audio CD or something. So we're going to record as high res as possible. And then the record label just said, we can't do this anymore. And they folded. And I started recording more and more stuff. And then finally, oh yeah, right. My third album I did for Narada was the first one I did at home. It was an album called Robot Monster. And I was really happy with how it sounded. Even now I throw it on, I think, I knew what I was doing by then. So that's 16 years ago. So now, I have a very simple setup here. I have a good interface made by Focusrite. It's called the Claret 4 Pre. Yeah, there you go, a fellow Claret user.
Yep.
I use Pro Tools still. I have the subscription now, and I have a late model Mac laptop that I record on. And I have a nice mic collection, which I haven't added to in years, but I've got like a great big Rode condenser microphone that I use as kind of my main studio microphone. It's good for vocals. It's good for instruments, anything. I have these 414s that I use stereo pair on sometimes for recording guitars, or if I'm recording drums or whatever.
Yeah.
And I did an album. I recorded a record for my wife when she was signed to Sony USA back in the 2000s, and I still have an 8-channel A to D converter preamp thing that I can record drums with, one instrument per channel kind of thing. So I can go up to 18 channels into my interface at once. So it's fantastic. You can do amazing multi-track recording if you want. So my most recent record, I did a bunch of different things. I played all the instruments on the album. There's some solo guitar tunes. There's some harp guitar tunes. There's some vocal tunes. But I also played piano. I played electric guitar. I played my fretless bass. And I also used some drum loops, which I'd never really done before. But there's a company called Loop Loft, and they bring in people like Omar Hakim and Celso Alberti and Nick Smith and all these incredible players to come in and just groove away in the studio. And then they send you little stems by download that you can buy from them, and they're copyright free. And so on my last record, I had Omar Hakim playing on one tune, Sting's old drummer, and I had Celso Alberti, this amazing Brazilian percussionist, playing another tune. But they were somewhere else earlier and I was in Halifax.
Is that the louder than usual? album?
No, this is the A Million Brazilian Civilians.
Oh, okay.
Louder Than Usual is live off the floor with 4 jazz musicians, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So, mhm.
Wow.
That's
Which I'm really happy with. I love that album. I thought that we were gonna get all kinds of summer bookings this year. It didn't work out, but next summer.
sorry. It's some of it's really jazzy. I really like it. A lot of Latin
Mhm.
tunes that I like.
Well, that's the thing, like, I've written, like, hundreds of tunes, and some of them were definitely written with, collaboration in mind, with a small sort of, like, chamber jazz kind of ensemble in mind,
Mm.
and got to record a few of them that way, like, when I was signed to Sony or whatever, when there was a budget, and then this time I just, thought, "Well, I'll take a little bit of, time and money, I'll just throw my friends together that I've been playing with off and on for years," but never in that particular combination. And we all went into a studio in Toronto and just recorded these tunes of mine that were kicking around, waiting for a really amazing group of musicians to play on them. And those are literally live off the floor, usually first takes of those tunes. And I was, we thought, well, let's tape a rehearsal, but it ended up being an album. I like it when that happens.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very, very organic, and you get that feel that you're kind of looking for. It's nice.
Yeah, and when the players are so good that you just like you're all in the same room, just sort of looking at each other. All you have to do is raise your eyebrows or lift your headstock or whatever, and everybody just does what intuitively. Oh, there's that spot that we're all going to do something on. Boink, there it is. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. I really enjoy it.
I want to go back. I need to pick your brain a little bit more about this recording aspect. And I know Aaron loves this.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah, I
so
do too.
yeah, you obviously have a lot of experience with this, which is great. I recently recorded a couple fingerstyle tunes that I wrote, and I've been experimenting with multiple mics. I don't have a whole lot of equipment, but I have this one condenser mic, and I tried putting an SM57 or a 58 in a different spot. But do you typically, when you're recording an acoustic guitar, about how far do you want to put your mic off the guitar? Do you want it over the sound hole? Do you want it more kind of over where the fingerboard meets the sound hole? Or you just try a whole bunch of different things and mix them together to find the sound that you want? Do you have any go-to
Bear
method?
with me. I'm just going to grab something that's right behind me here on a shelf. Hold on.
Okay. Yeah, I've been trying to figure this out.
One of my secret weapons. I use this mic a lot. Now, I told you about the large condenser microphone that I often use for kind of everything, and I do use
the Rode mic.
the Rode. It's called a K2. Is it a K2? I think it's a K2 or an NTK. I can't remember which one it is, but they make 2 mics that are very similar. But one of them has a changeable pattern on it, and the other one doesn't. Anyway, I've got the one with the changeable pattern. But they also make this crazy thing, and what it is, it's called an NT4, and it's a stereo microphone. So you can see how it's 2 mics there, two in one, kind of like certs, and it's got a left channel and a right channel, and it's in an XY pattern built in. So it's kind of a no-brainer stereo microphone. Like you don't have to even know anything about mic setup or whatever. And this thing sounds incredible. I think they retail for like $600. So it's basically 2 mics for $600. And it takes this weird looking cable because it's 2 channels. So the part that goes into the mic has like, I don't know how many pins that is. That's 6 or something. 1, 2, 3, 5. It's a 5-pin connector, but it looks like an XLR. And so you shove it in there, and then on the other end of the cable, there's 2 regular XLR, left, right. Okay, so that into your and I also use a really nice A to D converter mic preamp called it's made by Grace, and it's a company that makes preamps. And this is an older one they don't make anymore, but it still works great. So I keep using it. It's called the Lunatech V3. I'm sure you can get a used one for like $1,000. They were 2,000 new, and I got mine in 2003. So that way you can bypass your built-in preamps if you want. using the SPDIF connection. It's a digital RCA connection, and so my interface allows me to bypass the built-in preamps if I want to. The preamps and the clarinet are really good, so they sound great too. So I have a choice of preamps that I can use. But man, this thing left right through my Grace preamp sounds incredible. And I recorded most of the solo tunes off my last record, my last solo album, with this. And then what I do for something like the harp guitar is I have this in front of the regular guitar, and I have a D112, which is a microphone that AKG makes, and it's made really for either upright basses or kick drums, and so it's a real good bottom end mic. So I use that on the bottom end strings on the harp guitar, and it just sounds like $1 million, you know. And I also use the transducers. I run the transducers from the guitars
The K&K system.
yeah, through a channel or two on my rig, and then that way I have the choice to use them to boost certain frequencies if I want, or to drive effects. So when I record a solo guitar tune, typically I've got this about 6 inches away from the guitar, kind of not right at the sound hole, sort of a little behind it, like between the sound hole and the bridge,
Okay.
so it doesn't get too boomy. And so that, and then the transducer coming out. Sometimes I go transducer and onboard microphone on separate channels, you know, from the K&K, but sometimes I just use the transducer. And then I usually use the transducer like I would use a magnetic on stage, where I roll off all the high end, and I just use it to juice up the bottom end. So like on PS15, for example, if you listen to a tune like Michael, that tune I recorded slightly differently. I had my big Rode condenser in the middle, and I had a pair of these 414s off to the side, X wide, so that I had a stereo pair and a center channel. And so it's a different way of recording, and you have to mix really carefully so you don't get phase issues.
Right.
And then I also use the transducer. And if you listen to the low C on that thing, like through a set of headphones or through a good pair of speakers, it's like, how the hell do you get that much bottom end of an acoustic guitar? It sounds incredible. And it really does sound great. Like Clem Bim sounds like that as well. All the low tuned pieces on that record, the bottom end is crazy. And so that's a little secret as well. Use your transducer, but don't use it as your main signal. Just use it as a way of colorizing or complementing your microphone sounds. I'm a big fan of just using mics on an acoustic guitar. That's just the best sound. And they don't have to be super expensive. This is not a super expensive microphone. My regular Rode big giant condenser was about $1,000, and these 414s are about $1,000 each. So you don't have to clear out your bank account. I invested slowly over years, and I'm really happy with my mic collection, which, like I say, I haven't really changed in a long time.
That is exactly what I needed there. Thank you.
Cool.
That was extremely helpful. And update, I don't know if you heard that little ping a few minutes ago, but that was my luthier Larry Burwald telling me that my K&K system just arrived at the shop. So I can drop off my guitar whenever I want.
Yabba dabba. Oh, you're gonna be so happy.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what you were just saying about using the transducers to get the bottom end.
Oh yeah.
I've had a hard time because this last song, I just used this one mic, and I duplicated the tracks, and I've separated them into like just bass frequencies, just low mids, just high mids, just highs, and I've been trying to get the bass to sound good, and I'm like, so part of me doesn't know if it's the guitar. I mean, I realize that's why they make those fan fret guitars, so you can get a better bass sound.
Yeah, you get more tension on the bottom strings. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
yeah,
I'll try it like this.
Really, a lot of it is trial and error, and also really trusting your ears. I mean, there's been a bit of a problem with digital technology because everything is on a screen and everything is numerical, and everybody's always looking at that, at gauges and all that kind of stuff, and they don't just trust their intuition enough. And ultimately, what you really want to do, like, of course, I understand how all that stuff works, and I'm careful about it. But in the end, when I listen to a take or a mix or whatever, I usually turn my screen off, and I pretend it's a tape machine that I'm not looking at, and I just sit between the speakers and listen to it and say, what does it sound like? Use your ears. I had this really great experience, maybe one of the happiest days of my life. When I was recording, my wife's name is Brooke Miller, and she had a very active music career for a bunch of years, but she's younger, and she came along after Napster, and it was just so hard to get going, even though she got signed to Sony out of Manhattan and everything else. We all had stars in our eyes. But we made this really cool record, mostly at home with my gear. And at the time, we lived in this big old Victorian house north of Toronto. So we had, we were recording in different rooms and stuff like that. And we recorded the band in a decommissioned church, in all these different rooms. It was an amazing experience. But finally, Sony said, well, do you want to mix the record? And I said, you know what? If there's a budget, I think somebody else should mix it. I think it's just a fresh set of ears. So I've been working on this record for 2 years, and I've kind of over listened to it. And then they said, great, sure. So we ended up working with Frank Filipetti, who, if you don't know who that is, like, he's won Grammy Awards for like engineering James Taylor records and Sting records and all this kind of stuff. So I heard we're going to work with Frank Filipetti right in Times Square, New York. And I was starting to, lose my, what. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know what's going to happen here. I hope I did a good job. I just got really insecure feeling. So I was thrilled, but at the same time, I thought, So sure enough, we show up. Frank's lovely, but he's busy. So we're sitting my wife and I are sitting in the back of the studio in the couch, from day to day for a couple of days, and he's just there with a stogie and making all these changes and here and there, going through the tunes a couple of seconds at a time. And got to be pretty tedious. So on the second day, we went out for a nice long walk. We came back, and Frank was still there, listening to a few seconds at a time. And we took our perch back in the back of the room again. And the guy who co-produced the record and A&R'd Brooke to get her Sony deal, he's sitting with us, and he's like a super experienced guy in the biz, So at one point, Frank, winner of all these Grammys, turns around with this big stogie sticking out of his mouth. He says, "Where was this recorded?" And I couldn't tell by the way he said it what he meant. And I said, we recorded it at our place. And he says, "What were you using for equipment?" I thought, oh no. I said, ProTools, going through an iBook. It wasn't even a high-end laptop. It was just a cheap, one of the cheaper Macs. And he goes, "You recorded this at home on an iBook?" And I thought, here we go. And he says, "This is like the best sounding thing I've worked on in years." I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "Just shows you, Don. Just shows you. Good mics, good ears. That's all you need, right?" And he turned right back to what he was doing. And I felt like I was going to explode with joy. I couldn't believe. And and Peter was like looking at me like, and Brooke's grabbing my arm and going, "Frank Filipetti thinks you're really good." So that to me was the best vindication ever. I just thought, okay, if this dude says my recording is good, then I got it down. And that was like 2006,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's true what he says. Like the mics just have to be good. They don't have to be expensive. And you have to trust your ears. It's so important. Like, people are afraid to trust their ears. One of the best ways to trust your ears is to A/B things, right? If there's a record that you love, that you just think, oh my God, that record sounds so good, whatever kind of music it is. And then you can set it up so that you can A/B back and forth between it and what you're working on. And you say, okay, my record doesn't sound anywhere as good as that one. What can I do? Is it making more brilliance in the top end? Is it beefing up the bottom end? Is it making it breathe a bit better? Is it an EQ issue? You can eventually figure it out just by A/Bing and emulating the quality of a recording that you like. Not necessarily trying to make it sound the same, but you're just trying to emulate the quality, the high quality that you're hearing, and saying, I know I have the technology to do that. It's just a matter of figuring out a way, and then trusting these things that stick out the side of your head.
Yeah. With all my students, I know that, you're absolutely right. So many people, especially now in today's world, are kind of attached to the screen. Everybody's got like a spectral analyzer, and they've got all these graphs, and they can see exactly, and even A/Bing, they'll see like, okay, this song has bass in this region and these frequencies, and they'll kind of start matching. And with all my students, and they kind of look at me a little bit weird sometimes, but with all my recording students, what I'll do is I'll kind of take a piece of paper or a cloth and I'll throw it over top of the monitor, and they'll just kind of look at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, it's mixing. You need to use your ears.
Ear holes.
Yeah. It's the way it's been done for decades and decades and decades. And there's a reason for it. You have to trust what's coming out of your monitors and the environment, the room that you're in, and how you're hearing it, and then go from there.
You betcha. You got it. But that's so much of it is people just not trusting their guts and their ears. Yeah, it's too bad. I think it's also, it's part of what's endemic, even on the didactic side of things, the pedagogical side of things. When I do a transcription of one of my pieces, I know that 99% of the people who buy a copy of one of my tabs never look at the standard notation, which is just a shame.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a terrible sight reader. Most guitarists are. The guitar is a really difficult instrument to sight read for. So I understand you're not going to use the standard notation necessarily to learn every note of the song, but the standard notation tells you the rhythms. If it's been notated properly, it'll tell you whether to use your thumb or your fingers to finger a note in your right hand, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of reasons to, and even if you just want to say, well, if you're a good sight singer, and if you look at it and say, well, how does it go? Oh, it goes la 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 la. You can trace it, the melody line, even if you've never heard it before. But people are just so visually oriented, especially now. It's gotten even worse. It was always bad, but now with tablature, it's like even when I'm teaching somebody face to face, I very often can't say to them, well, it's like the G on the high E string. They won't necessarily know what I mean. I'll have to say, well, fret number 3. It's too bad. We wish he also knew it was a G. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump over. I love all the recording studio stuff, but
Sure.
in an effort to fit everything in, I'd like to know what your most memorable show has been in your career, or you could have a couple different ones, and why was it especially memorable?
Well, it's a great it's a great question. Certainly I've played so many shows, and certainly I've had a lot of fun at a lot of them. Some of them have been a terrible drag. It's par for the course.
I guess you should also tell us your least favorite show, your biggest bomb.
I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell you the crappy ones first, because it's always nice to end on a good note. I remember one time. This is back before smoking started to get sort of disallowed pretty much everywhere in the Western world. So the first many years I was touring, if I played a club, you got used to just smelling like smoke when you left. And of course, I haven't smoked cigarettes since I was 17 or something. So I went through a short I'm so cool with a cigarette sticking out of my mouth phase, like a lot of us did. But so I had no interest in smoking or cigarettes. I just can't stand it. But I had to put up with it for a long time at the beginning of my career in the club environment. And so I think we'd already kind of outlawed smoking in Canada and most public places, but in a lot of Europe, it was still okay. They eventually saw the light too. But Brooke and I had this gig in Schweinfurt in Germany. It was organized by this really well-meaning fellow, but I don't think he knew the venue very well. Anyway, I think about 7 people showed up, and they all smoked like chimneys, and there was no ventilation, no nothing. And so Brooke and I were depressed as hell to be halfway around the world playing to 7 people in Schweinfurt, which literally means pig ford. But anyway, because that was the place on the river centuries ago where they would bring the pigs across because it was shallow. Anyway, that's where the name of the town came from.
Okay.
So here we were playing in Pigford to 7 people and getting our lungs blown out with everybody else's smoke. And so at the end of that, we kind of looked at each other and said, why are we not plumbers or accountants or something, And I did another gig with her again in Japan on a Tuesday night. Our booking agent thought it would be good not to have any nights off, which, sometimes a night off on the road is not unwelcome, especially if the option is to play for 15 people in a very small town in the faraway mountains of Japan, where, people have never heard music that sounds like yours. They've had very little contact with the West. It was a weird experience.
Wow.
And another one where we both looked at each other saying, why are we doing this? But those have been few and far between, fortunately. I would say my most memorable experiences, way back when I first started, I got to play with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra.
Oh,
And a bunch of my tunes got orchestrated by professional orchestrators. And I was all of 25 years old or something. And at the end of it, I just thought that, life doesn't get any better than this. That was very exciting to have a 70-piece backup band. That was crazy. And since then, I've gotten to play with orchestras several times, and every time it's insane. It's crazy. Played with a few Canadian orchestras and a bunch of orchestras in Germany, and it's gone really well. Another time, you have July 4th in the States. Well, July 1st here in Canada is our sort of equivalent holiday. It's the national holiday. And there was one year back in the 90s where I got asked to play at the midday performance. There's sort of two big performances on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, the nation's capital, that day. So there's a noontime show which features speakers and a military band, and then a bunch of usually pop singers and stuff like that singing whatever. And so I got to play at that one year to 60,000 people. It was
Oh, wow.
bananas, just looking out at the sea of heads, and so that was cool. And I think maybe kind of again, I liked it for the combination of the setting and the sonics. I played at a guitar festival in Italy in a town called San Benedetto Po, which is near Bologna. And I was told that the setting was really special, but then I got there and it was an ancient monastery, and that hadn't been used as a monastery in a long time. But all the buildings were still there, and there was a quadrangle in among all the buildings that was all grass, and that's where the outdoor show was going to be. And they set up this big, beautiful stage, and the show was going to be free to the public, and they were expecting between 500 and 1,000 people, and so I was pretty thrilled to begin with. And then a lot of shows in Italy have like the best sound equipment you've ever heard. There's a couple of companies over there that are renowned for live sound equipment. So sure enough, the guy who's running the desk, he says, so Don, we can do your sound check now. I said, great. So I get up there, and I had a really nice rig, and it was all stereo and beautiful sounding effects, and nice reverbs and nice choruses and stuff. And I'm checking everything that I have. And then he gets on the talkback mic on the monitors, and I'm in this gorgeous setting. The place is empty. And he says, Don, he says, this sounds very good. Would you like to hear your sound check? And I said, well, how would I do that? And he says, I have made a digital recording of your sound check. I went, awesome. So I went out into the middle of the field in amongst these 1,000-year-old buildings through this incredible PA system that sounded like the best stereo you've ever heard. And I'm listening to myself,
Right.
that the stuff I played 4 minutes before coming, and that I didn't even know was being recorded. And I was just thought, this is incredible. And then that night the place was packed, and people were holding candles and all. It was just amazing.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, I can die happy right now. I can die happy right now. So those are nice experiences. Those are the kinds of things where you just think, okay, this is why I do this.
Yeah.
And I'll go to the grave remembering this.
that's
Amazing.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for up and coming guitarists and interested in, the acoustic guitar, fingerstyle, or any style of music, anything that you see people consistently doing wrong, or that you think they should, just some piece of advice that would help them along the way?
Well, there are a few things that I guess I always feel a little bit sad about, maybe, but I understand a lot of it is the age we live in. We're in this kind of since the advent of the digital economy and the internet and stuff like that, I think that there has been a little less because people are afraid to take chances because it's so difficult to make money now as a musician. That's just the truth. I mean, I used to make a much better living in the 90s. I'll be very frank, because I had record advances. I was signed to Sony. I was doing, I had a really nice company behind me, nice people, even though people love to hate record companies. All the people I worked at record companies were amazing people, and they believed in my music, and I was really flattered, and it was great. Um, so back then it was kind of like, yeah, I mean, I could support a family of 5, and my wife, my late wife didn't work, and we had kids at home and stuff, and it was awesome. It was really, in a lot of ways, I think back to it and think, well, they were lucky. But in the digital economy, it's been very, very difficult. It's just so much um, uh, pressure to give everything away for free, and to do this for free, and to do that for free, and it's all about exposure. So you can give more things away for free, and it's just drives me nuts. So I know that there's been kind of a shortcut attitude that a lot of people are taking, especially now that they have access to essentially broadcasting what they do to an audience right away and for very cheap. Um, I get a little sad at the kind of the infatuation with just coming up with another damn cover song. It's like, to me, it's like, it's really sad that originality and creativity seem to be more than ever losing the battle. Um, Now it's like, oh, I'm going to put another cover of another U2 song up, or I'm going to do another cover of another Guns N' Roses song, or something, some god awful piece of junk. And you just have to go, well, okay, I guess it's a quick way to appeal to a large number of people who grew up listening to that song. I get it. I get it. But to me, it's like, it's a bit of a tragedy, and that's why I really value players like Petteri Sariola out of Finland.
It's awesome.
There's somebody who's doing something that's truly unique. It sounds like him. Yeah, he's done a few cover tunes in the past and stuff like that, but his most recent record, Resolution, and I've told them this to his face, it was by far and away my favorite record of 2017. It's one of my favorite albums I've ever heard. And the combination of the creativity, the original writing, the grooves, the incredible guitar playing, and the sonics on that record. Oh my God, I can't believe the sounds he gets. Such beautiful, rich bottom end, and uh, very tasteful use of effects, and everything still sounds like an acoustic guitar. And I think he's a killer singer too.
Yeah.
So, he to me is an example of somebody that makes me feel more hopeful, right? Because he's really killing it. And so I would tell people to look at people like him, as and a few others as really good examples of how you can play your own game. You can write your own music. You can forge your own individuality as a musician, and that to me is more valuable than somebody just playing the hits. And I won't mention any more names
Hmm.
because I don't want to slag people. But there's a lot of people who have gotten quite popular just playing the hits, and I get it, because it's an easy way to make a living. But there's a side of me that just goes, man, give me something new.
Mm.
Like Stevie Wonder already did that song way better than you'll ever play it, or why are you covering Beatles songs? That's like paraphrasing the Bible. Are you nuts? But that's just me, I guess. I,
Well,
I, I like individuality.
it's happening like you said, it's happening everywhere, across the music field and across, honestly, Hollywood as well. I mean, look at all of the movies that are being remade, and it's such a disappointment that so many people are looking to the past and to recreate the past, which I get it. I understand the nostalgia, and like you said, people have grown up with that, and it's very accessible because it's, we all know those tunes. But there is something to originality that, like you said, it's fresh. And I think a lot of that is needed right now, where people aren't afraid to put themselves out there and try new things. I think
Amen, brother.
that's
Yeah,
really what's that's the stuff that's, that's what
I'm
I
with you
want.
there. Well, I'll tell you a funny little story, which I've told very few people, but my first wife died quite young, and her grandparents were still alive when I was getting going. So this is like my wife, who's older. She was older than me, and her grandparents are still alive. So it's kind of, they were really old,
Yeah.
and I was staying with them in the town in the Midwestern Canada they were living in, and her grandfather was this, typical kind of prairie kind of guy. He was a real left wing prairie kind of guy, but he was a ardent socialist, workers, union kind of guy. But he was really old at this point. He was like almost 90 years old, and so he's sitting there with me, and he says, "Don," says, "I got a question for you." I said, "Sure, shoot, Gramps." And he says, "Just wondering, do you know that guy Segovia?" And I said, "Oh, you mean Andre Segovia?" He goes, "Yeah, whatever, that guy." I said, "You know him?" I said, "Not personally. He's been dead for a while, but I know who you mean. Yes, great guitarist." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Do you do any of his stuff?" And I said, "Well, Gramps, Segovia wasn't really a composer. He was an arranger. So he arranged like a lot of Scarlatti and Bach and all that kind of stuff for the solo
Right.
guitar, which was, at the time was completely, nobody had ever done it before. It was an amazing thing." And he was saying, okay. Well, anyway, this guy Segovia, he says, "Do you do any of his stuff?" I said, "I do a few Bach transcriptions. Yes, for fun. I don't do them on stage." He says, "Okay, you can play that stuff though." I said, "Yes, Gramps, I can." He says, "Well, then why don't you?" And I said, "Well," I said, I'm a composer. So the shtick that I have is that you go to my shows, you're going to hear my tunes. People come to, and then he was saying, "Yeah, but couldn't you make a lot more money just giving the people what they want?" And I thought, okay, man, this is really cool. Here's a 90-year-old man saying the same thing that people who are in their 20s say, like you could just, I could take an easier way out if I want. And then finally, my wife's grandmother just chips in. She says, "Oh, he's got to do his own thing. Just leave him alone. He's got to do his own thing."
Yeah.
And he was saying, "Yeah, but I probably make more on pension than he does now." And I said, "But I said, Gramps, I don't think I was put on the world just to make money. I said, just like you fought for whatever, rights and things that you had as a worker and stuff like that. But you didn't want to be a banker. You didn't want to be a lawyer. You wanted to weld. He was a welder." I said, "So you got to do what you wanted." And he was, "Well, yeah, well, okay." But it's interesting. There's always that pressure to. I mean, my dad has done it too. He's saying, "Why don't you write? Why don't you write to Celine Dion and say that you'll, put some music to some words?" I'm just like, I could do that if I wanted to,
Yeah.
but it's like you gotta want it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to.
Yeah.
Oh,
But it's hard.
Fortunately,
It's always hard to get people to understand that there's even though it's hard, there's a huge amount of reward that comes from just um, sort of eking out your own stuff. I mean, this is the other thing too. People say, well, uh, playing a Beatles cover is a good idea because everybody knows those tunes. And I just think to myself, yeah, but I mean, aside from the very beginning of their career, the Beatles weren't playing covers. You don't pick up Rubber Soul to hear a cover of, Johnny Be Good. You pick it up to hear all the cool songs that are on Revolver or what, or Rubber Soul. The White Album is not an album of covers. So they had to create their own music. And that's how they took their greatest reward, by being creative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than that, for a guitarist getting going these days, I always tell people, look, make as many videos as you possibly can. I mean, I don't make anywhere near as many as I should, but make as many videos as you possibly can. It's the only way to get any exposure. Put them on Facebook, put them on Instagram, put them on Twitter, put them on YouTube, everywhere you can possibly spread yourself. And it would be nice if it was original music and cool stuff that you're doing that's unusual. And then build up a name for yourself that way. That's kind of the way to do it now. You're not going to get it on the radio. There's no MTV anymore. So just build your own fan base, because you can do everything yourself now.
Yeah.
And then that can lead to gigs, which can lead to making a living. Back when I started, it was more a matter of getting that recording deal and hoping the recording deal led to gigs, which let you make a living. Now it's kind of backwards. Now it's like you gotta promote yourself without a recording necessarily, and just get out there and hustle and play as many gigs as you can. I did a whole lot of crappy gigs to start my career just to get my name out there, and it worked out okay. I'm a pretty busy guy now, and I get to play in dozens of countries, which is great.
When you were starting out, were you playing original music, or were you playing a mixture of original and cover music back then?
When I was a teenager, just doing it, as a very, very, very part-time thing when I was going to school, I didn't really have a whole lot of music that I'd written. So I would sneak a few original instrumental tunes in the midst of, covering a Jonathan Edwards tune or a James Taylor song or whatever people wanted to hear, in order to, and I mean, I grew up in Montreal, so it was a pretty cool place to grow up because uh, I looked 3 or 4 years older than I was. So, and Montreal was always pretty loosey goosey about liquor laws. So I could go play at licensed establishments when I was 15, and nobody ever asked me. I looked the part. Drinking age was 18, so I looked 18, so I could get away with it. And the more I did it, the more I started sneaking more and more of I had more incentive to keep writing new music, because now I actually had gigs. So I would sneak more and more of my own original material in there. But then when I finally made the decision to go full time, which wasn't until I was in my mid 20s, I decided to just do it with 100% original music. I just figured I'll let the audience find me. I'm not going to go looking for an audience that's already built in. I know it'll take some time. It'll be an investment of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears, but I'll do it. And so it was much more on my own terms. And again, like I say, that has its own rewards, for sure.
Well, I should say it paid off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a rich guy, but I'm having a heck of a fun life. I really am.
Yeah. As long as you love what you do, that's honestly
You
all that
betcha.
really matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Aaron, do you have any final questions?
I did have one small question. I did read that you do a guitar camp.
Yeah, it's like a weekend of just come to my house and we'll nerd out about music and guitars yeah, and I'm doing one this year for the first time in a few years. I used to do it every year, sometimes twice a year when I lived in Ontario. And it's kind of it was a very central location. It was easy for people to get to the Toronto airport from anywhere in North America, or people were coming from Europe and Hawaii and everything else to get to go. Then when I moved here to the East Coast, and of course Canada's East Coast is a lot further east than the American East Coast, so I'm an hour ahead of your time, even though you're on the easternmost time zone in the States. So I tried it here on Prince Edward Island, which is a very beautiful island province, not far from where I live. And people did come, but it was a much harder job to do that.
Right.
And it was very expensive because I took over a hotel and bought all this food and everything. And I didn't make a whole lot of money at it, but it was still fun to do. So this year I decided to revive it. My wife and I moved to this property that's directly on the ocean, and the house that's directly next to us is just as big as the one. We're in a fairly large house these days. It's just as big as this one, and it's rented out most of the time to holiday makers, and the people who own it show up every once in a while. But I worked it out with them that I could rent it for the time that I wanted to do my guitar weekend. So I'm doing it on Canadian Thanksgiving weekend, which is in the middle of October. So October 11th through 14th. And I had all the spots sold, but I just had a cancellation. So if this airs soon,
Yes.
I do have one spot available. So you can check it. It's donrossguitarweekend.com. I think that's the URL. Anyway, and it's nice. People just stay at my house, or they'll stay next door, like 10 feet away. And we're right on the ocean, and there's hiking trails, and there's in October it might be a little cool to swim, but it's very beautiful looking around here. The fall colors are amazing. I'm right near Peggy's Cove, which is a very historic lighthouse on the end of the peninsula here. Real tourist mecca there. That's 10 minutes away. And And it's nice. Basically, it's a pedagogical weekend. I usually do it with a co-host. This year, I decided as an experiment, I just tried doing it myself and only having 6 people. So
Mhm.
it's very exclusive.
And
So
what is your focus throughout the weekend?
it's working on fingerstyle technique, composition technique, learning my tunes because people very often want to learn them up close, and we do them as a group. And also, I offer a lot of one-on-one instruction because there's several hours in the day set aside for just half-hour lessons or whatever, and people can over the course of the weekend they get 2 half-hour lessons and one-on-one, and we can talk about whatever they want to talk about.
Oh man.
But yeah, it's awesome, and
Yeah.
there's it's going to be nicely catered, and it's a really fun event. I used to love doing them when I lived in Ontario, and the one in PEI was fun too.
And you're thinking about so are you possibly planning on doing twice a year? Is that something that you are considering, maybe after this October, maybe doing another one in the spring or something like that?
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking very strongly twice a year, especially if I keep doing them on my own.
Mhm.
Then it's even just the cost of having a co-host is very high. So uh, I can only really accommodate a small number of people. So
Right.
uh, the idea of keeping it just me and a bunch of guests suits me just fine right now. In the future, I might go back to the larger format with a co-host, but I'd have to have a venue for that, which I live remotely enough that that's a bit of a hassle. But
Right.
anyway, I mean, but where I am is only a little over half an hour from the Halifax airport, so pretty
Awesome.
handy.
Well, we'll
Yeah.
definitely keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, for sure.
If you do open up another session, we'll kind of broadcast that to our listeners, because that just sounds like a great time. And even in a small group, I know with me and past whatever it is, the idea of 6 people and you were there with a mentor is, oh man, I don't know that it gets much better than that.
Yeah, and you're even staying in that mentor's house, when I used to have it in Ontario, like I say, we had this big rambling Victorian house, and most of the people stayed at my place, but also the overflow would go to the neighbors' houses and stuff like that. And that was what people took away most. I got to hang out in this house with a bunch of like-minded people. Isn't that nice? It's a really nice experience. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
And I get to stay home.
Which is like the biggest benefit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One offside question that I was kind of thinking about. Are you from? My first experience with real experience, because I was into James Taylor and Eric Clapton, and when he came out with this acoustic album and whatnot like that. But it wasn't really until 1996 or 97 when I went to see Joe Satriani on the G3 tour up in Boston, that they had this guy, this finger picker, come in, and his name was Adrian Legg.
Adrian Legg, yeah, of course.
Just amazing. It just blew me away.
Yeah, talk about unique. There's a unique guy for you.
Yeah, just his approach was just out of left field, and I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, you got all these like electric guitar people in the audience, and here's this, at the time he was 60 some years old, and the place was just silent, thousands of people, and there's this 60-year-old man up on stage, and everybody's just like zoned in on him. It was great. It was wonderful. I'll never forget it. It was a wonderful experience.
I'll tell you, speaking of wonderful experiences, when I lived in Toronto, there was this place that opened up. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. I was there for a couple of years. It was called the Guitar Bar. There really was such a place. And it was upstairs at this well-known jazz place called Top of the Senator. So there was a Senator restaurant on the main floor, on the ground floor, and then the first floor above that was the Top of the Senator. That was the jazz club, and then above that was the Guitar Bar. So I used to jokingly refer to it as the top of the Senator. Anyway, when they first opened, they brought in all these really heavyweight players like Alex DeGrassi, Herb Ellis, Larry Coryell. Oh man, the list went on. Joe Pass was still alive. He came in, and Adrian Legg played, and I played, and anyway, I can't remember who else. But people were saying, you got to go see Adrian Legg. So sure enough, I went to the guitar bar, and most people didn't know anything about him. So he maybe had 40 people there. And yeah, I was just like, holy moly, that was wild.
Yeah.
And yeah, really innovative with all the retuning and crazy stuff that he does in the middles of phrases and tunes and stuff. So yeah, we're still Facebook buddies.
That's awesome. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, you bet.
I've never heard him. I'm gonna have to look him up after this.
LEGG, Adrian Legg. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Don, it has been wonderful getting to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, great to get to know you guys, and more power to you with this, and good luck with everything.
Yeah, we're just trying to bring, real deep discussions about music to people, so that people can learn about it and fuel their own passions. And maybe while they're driving around there, instead of wasting their time listening to something else, they
Rush Limbaugh.
they get something positive out of their time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good.
We really appreciate your time. So have a wonderful weekend.
Pleasure. Yeah, you too. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks to you guys.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thanks,
Don. We
Don.
really do
Yeah, you bet.
appreciate it.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.